Hello, writers! Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me!
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smuga-Otto, author of the humorous fantasy series Boy Bands and Dragons. The first book, Our Comeback Tour Slaying Monsters, will be released this year by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. Welcome to another episode of Words to Write By.
Welcome.
How y'all doing? Wait, you can't reply back to me.
You haven't done that one for a while, but
I know. I've been holding on to it for a while so it doesn't get stale. Anyway, dear listener, before we get started, I just want to remind you we have a process group for writers. It is on every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's free. You can find us on Meetup, or you can go to our website, click on the poster, and it will take you to the Meetup website. And it is free.
And we don't critique each other's work, but we talk about our problems and the things we're thinking about and all the issues that our relatives are sick and tired of us talking about. So it's a really good time, and I often learn quite a bit.
Yep. And if you found yourself writing funk, or you're just starting out a new project, this is a nice place to dip your toes into a writer's community. It's pretty chill. We have a lot of fun, and we can give you some guidance.
Yeah. Okay. And with that, we are on to the last two stages of the hero's quest. We are halfway through the book.
But we're done with the quest! Woo!
We have the option right now that if we really wanted to, we could just dump the book and not think about it again. So we really have covered the meat of it.
I bet you most people dump the book at this point.
Oh, I can imagine.
And it's probably worthy of being dumpable. Hey, is there like a soundbite to celebrate that we've reached the end?
Yeah, there's applause. One of the top four is an applause.
Well, we've done the applause. Okay, so there's these buttons here. I'm just going to press them. They say don't press the button, but do it anyway. Okay, no. That's kind of fun. Oh, they go together. I see.
No, they don't.
This is awesome. I love this thing. She's going to cut all this out. It's okay. I'm just going to give Kim, I promise I am totally giving Kim a high five. High five, Kim. Woo! We have finished the steps at least and have just made it to the middle of the book.
So with all that celebration in mind, I'd like to say that when I actually started reading the stage 11, the resurrection, I was like, what? I thought the climax was the road home. I mean, we were talking about the chase. We were talking the extra excitement. We were talking about, the villain comes back, all that stuff. But apparently, no, it's the resurrection that's the climax.
I guess. Honestly, I think the crisis would probably be more exciting than the climax.
Well, the crisis was the ordeal.
Right.
And now this is the official climax. But we had all this other energy stuff happening too. And two things. First of all, Vogler makes things complicated. I read this stuff and I don't understand. I understand less because he doesn't give a framework or an analysis. And if you dig, there's some stuff there. But honestly, when I get a craft book, I want to be smarter at the end of it.
Did you feel smarter at the end of The Art of Fiction by Gardner?
Yeah, because I realized that if his main example at the end was Fanny the stripper, then obviously he wasn't that much better a writer than I was.
Honestly, I think I've learned a thing about writing advice books. There's some weird shit in them.
Yeah.
There's weird shit in this one, as we found. It's bizarre, but Anyway, yes, stage 11 is the resurrection.
So before we get into that, what do you see a climax being? Because I got confused on exactly what the climax was, if it had to have a resurrection and all that stuff.
Without reading this chapter, I would have said it was like the ultimate test of the hero. It is the thing that they've either been seeking or what they had to find or what they needed, or it's going to push them to the limit. And it's where there's explosions or there's severe catharsis or all sorts of crazy things going on for the hero. It is the thing you look forward to the most in the book.
That's a good one. I think the problem with this is that there are many different types of climaxes and they work differently. And I got frustrated. I went to Wikipedia and it told me that it is the turning point of a narrative work. It is the highest tension and drama of the story. And then the other thing I went to was something called Fictionary, which told me the protagonist should face the biggest obstacle in the story and determine their own fate. The useful thing they said was a chapter at the 90% mark of the story, because if it happens too early, then people get tired and they put down the book. If it happens too late, people get frustrated. So if anything else, your climax, whatever it is, should be at the 90% mark, 85 to 95% mark.
Sure.
Anyway, that was the useful stuff I got online because I was so frustrated with this chapter.
Here's a quote, and this is how I'm interpreting why he's calling this climax a resurrection, or why the climax is a resurrection. He says, "A new self must be created for a new world. Just as heroes had to shed their old selves to enter the special world, they now must shed personality of the journey and build a new one that is suitable for the return to the ordinary world."
But the returning to the ordinary world, that's the road back, right?
Well, it's not titled well. I would argue, yes, I would have titled that The Road Back. It is very complicated, but I feel like the resurrection, maybe it is like the biggest thing that the hero has to do is the big monster, but by doing it, the hero becomes transformed in attitude, in personality. I wrote down Iron Man, Tony Stark, right? He comes back from his ordeal changed. Mm-hmm. He comes back, and even in the end, he's got this fake heart that says proof that Tony Stark has a heart, right? Because at the beginning of the movie, he didn't have a metaphorical heart because he was like, selling weapons.
But did that change happen at the very end, around the 90% mark of the movie, or do you think the change happened earlier?
He was slowly changing throughout the plot. Each step and each test was slowly changing him. Because he was in a bunker and he was being held captive. But when he started fighting to get out, he was seeing exactly what his weapons had been doing to people. It wasn't just like, oh, I have an issue with these terrorists. I now have an issue with me and me supplying weapons to people like these people.
So that was the chain to the start. And then at the very climax, we got the full changeover. And that actually does get addressed in this chapter. So
anyway, so that's my interpretation, dear listener. Mm-hmm. That's why it's a resurrection, because Tony Stark officially changed.
And I'm frustrated with the book, too, because I'm reading these things and saying, oh, this actually is important tools for a writer to know. I just wish he would have said it more clearly
and gave better examples.
So we did personality now, and now we're on cleansing, and cleansing doesn't actually have any fictional examples. He mentions the Vietnam War.
The problem with cleansing, I think he is making things up. He says, oh yes, he goes, so-called primitive societies seem better prepared to handle the return of heroes. They provide rituals to purge the blood and death from hunters and warriors so they can become peaceful members of society again. Really? Really, which ones? I'm not saying they don't, but I'd like to know which ones he's actually referring to. And then he says, returning hunters may be quarantined safely away from the tribe for a period of time. He is making things up. Like, I'm not saying that these tribes don't exist and that they don't have these rituals. But given the history and the fact that he doesn't mention any of them, makes me think he's making it up.
The fact that it is primitive societies and we're not going to actually name any of these groups.
So-called, he says.
Yeah,
so-called.
It's a broad term for all the primitive societies around the world.
If you can't cite something like that,
I'm sure you could pick up any anthropology book and they'll have, a dozen examples of hunter-gatherer societies in various parts of the world, and you can put a name to it.
And you can mention it specifically. I mean, this is the 25th anniversary edition. Google exists now. He could go look it up.
I was going to say, when I read a book that has a different edition, I assume that they've gone through the whole thing and updated it. The reason why you get another edition is because things have changed. New things have come in. You want to be more in tune with the modern readers. But this feels like nothing got changed, just more things got added.
Okay, yes and no. New editions for huge books like this, that is clearly kind of supposed to be a textbook. They come up with new editions to force students to pay more money for new books instead of just getting the used version. They add more, so everyone still has to have the same book, and you can't just get the cheaper version. That's my theory.
Well, remember, you were in the arts. In the sciences, actually, 5-year-old textbooks need to be updated.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying that these couldn't add better stuff. I mean, I did teach a book called They Say, I Say. Really good book, by the way. If you're a comp teacher, think about it. And there would be great articles in the back and prompts to go with them. And they're easily, compare and contrastable and all this stuff for, first year college students. But they were updated every couple of years because trends change and controversies change. Those authors and publishers are very, very good. For that book specifically, they update it so that, when the new incoming freshmen come in, it's actually stuff that they would be aware of instead of some old controversy that they don't even care about, like legalize marijuana. Right? So I'm just saying that one might be worth getting the new version. But
Right. I don't think anything was done to update this version.
I agree.
Okay, so that's cleansing. And now we come to a next section called The Two Great Ordeals. I actually did start to get some information out of this because he addresses the fact that why do so many stories seem to have two climaxes or death and rebirth ordeals, one near the middle and another just before the end of the story? And so he's talking about the fact that there is the ordeal and there is the resurrection, and they're in two different spots of the book, and they have two different purposes.
Right. Well, what's the purpose of the first one?
I mean, we discussed about this in our episode on the ordeal, which was that, the whole book is leading up to this big fight. And then the world changes, things change as a result of that big fight. And that's what moves us to the third act and the road home resurrection climax, where new things have been come in place all come together then.
Like, can the hero adapt?
Right.
They've been preparing for this one thing, but now something that they haven't exactly prepared for or like they don't know is coming, will they follow through or will they show that they've really changed?
Right. I think the other thing is the first propels you into the story, but there's more stuff. The ordeal actually creates more story that you then have to address, and it's going to come to another high point. He talks about the physical ordeal, and I wrote, could just be one last fight.
Yeah, with the villain.
Mm-hmm. He talks here about how that one last fight is different because the danger is usually on the broadest scale of the entire story, and the stakes are the highest. I would like to point out that if the hero died or failed at any of the earlier events, or the ordeal, then the story would also be over. To say that the final fight is the most critical one because if he fails, everything falls apart is a bit like saying it's going to be in the last place you look. Naturally, it's going to be in the last place you look because once you find the object, you stop looking. Once you end the book, the fights are over.
Right. Let's just say that he didn't explain why this one's special than any other one. Mm-hmm. The next part is the active hero. We're all very aware that our heroes need to be active, not passive participants, and that's pretty much what he's saying.
It brings up the fact that you can't have the climax without your hero being a part of it. You can't have the climax happening to different characters because we've been following one character all the way along to this point.
Yeah. Then there's different types. He doesn't say that. You have to, this is as disorganized as the other chapters. He starts with showdowns, and he's really digging the Westerns in this chapter. And he talks about one of those showdowns on a Western, where there's the two sides and wah, 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 and, they have their guns and they're going to pull them out. So
one thing he does say about showdowns and duels and this nature is that there's a set of rules that go along with the particular end fight. And so as a writer, you lean into those. Like for the shootout, it's them standing back to back and stepping forward and all that. Or like in anime, it comes down to the single run at the other person with a sword, and one person has it in one position, the other person has it behind their head. You got the passing through, and you get them both standing, and then you see who got stabbed and dies.
Yeah, I just looked it up to make sure I said it right. So it's like in The Princess Bride, and he says, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." And he says it throughout the whole thing over and over and over again. But at the end, he really means it.
Right. The take home of this is that if you want to have a showdown, then it's good to look and see what other people do with showdowns, because you're allowed to use the various details again, because that's what we like.
Yeah, yeah. Just think duel, but it could be on a massive scale. It could be on a personal scale. It could be all sorts of different scales. Let's see. Oh, he also mentions in this part, which I thought was interesting, is readers find it very satisfying when, quote, the hero is taken right to the edge of death. I'm trying to think of an example other than Wolverine and Logan. But, you know, who doesn't just randomly get a nice little thought about Hugh Jackman? Not me.
No, of course not you.
Not at all.
Speaking for a friend.
Just
asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. What's the next part?
Death and rebirth of tragic heroes. Okay, so the deal here is if you want to have it be a tragedy and your character is going to die before the end, that's fine. But in order not to have the audience just be bummed out of their mind, there has to be some resurrection. Not necessarily the character, but maybe of their ideal. Or maybe in some other character learning something. Or something the audience can hang on to as they go out of the theater. Or as they close the book and say, well, I guess I'm still glad I read it.
All right, so essentially the hero lives on in the memory of the survivors, those for whom they gave their lives.
I'd like to point out that this actually features a movie that I have watched, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and yes, it ends with them being shot to death.
Nice.
Such a good movie. Also, screenplay by Princess Bride guy. Goldman did the screenplay for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Awesome. I found the worst sentence in the book.
Oh, no. That comes later, but...
No, this one here.
Oh, well,
structurally speaking.
We'll have a contest.
Oh!
You give me the first time.
Is it in the same section?
No, it's later on.
Okay.
I marked it, though.
Okay, so this, I think, is the worst sentence in terms of style.
Okay.
He says, another possibility for a resurrection moment may be a climactic choice among options that indicates whether or not the hero has truly learned the lesson of change.
Huh?
Possibility. That means choice. He says it again. Choice. He says it again. Options. Like, how many times do you have to say the word choice in a sentence? Another possibility for a resurrection moment may be a climactic choice among options. So essentially, he's saying the hero learns their lesson or changes in different ways. You can choose among different ways for the hero to do this. You could say that so much more clear instead of this very vague noun phrase.
To get to what the actual point of the section is, your climax happens when your hero makes a choice. And if they make the wrong choice, everything is for naught. So you'll know they'll make the right choice because this is the kind of story most people get. But everything's been building up to this choice, and the climax is that moment that they make the choice.
Right. He says, will he choose in accordance with his old flawed ways, or will the choice reflect the person he has become? I wrote down Sarah from Labyrinth.
And what's set up here is that all along the story, we've had elements, we've had the conflicts, the way that the hero has grown, everything goes into the point where the hero's a different person now, and that's the choice they make. Because if you had the hero from the beginning make that choice, they would not have made the right choice.
Right.
Next is romantic choice. There is absolutely nothing in that section. It's very short. He mentions The Graduate, It Happened One Night, and Sophie's Choice, which is about the impossible choice of a mother who is told by the Nazis to pick which of her children will die.
How is that romantic?
Exactly.
I never saw Sophie's Choice. Maybe there's a romance in it?
But that's not the thing he's talking about there.
No. I guess, yeah.
So We have a subsection actually called climax next
Ooh.
because we haven't been talking about the climax yet.
Oh, this is a perfect place for there to be a definition of the very thing he's been talking about for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages.
Yep.
He says it's the explosive moment, the highest peak in energy, or the last big event in a work. Okay, that definitely is the definition of climax.
Yep.
The quiet climax. What'd you think of that one?
Well, I think he's covering his butt because a lot of movies don't end up in a giant fight scene or the giant showdown or something like that. There's such a thing as a quiet climax, a gentle cresting of emotions. It might involve acceptance or understanding. I feel these make really good climaxes in movies, but part of it's because the actor knows how to portray that. If you're going to do a quiet climax, you really need to nail the emotions and connect with the reader, because otherwise they're going to read past it and not even notice it.
Do we have an example? I would say a quiet climax would be from The Last Unicorn. It's not while the castle's falling to the ground. It's afterwards when she talks to each individual. She talks to Prince Lur in their dream. Because for Prince Lur, he's like hoping she'll come back. And she's not. And he wants to go and search for her. And the only way for him to leave that quest behind was for her to talk to him and be like, look, I'm a unicorn. Back off. For him, that helped him kind of accept it. That's not his quest. His quest is not to find her, but his quest is to become a good king.
Was that a high drama moment?
Oh, yeah. All 3 of them. I was like, oh, my God, the quest is ending. She's leaving. She's leaving. Oh. And they all were so like, they were so emotionally connected to the unicorn in their own personal ways that this was her final goodbye. And I thought that was very big for me. Do you have an example?
None off the top of my head. I think I've read a fair amount of non-adventure books that would have had something like that, but I can't think of any.
Yeah, not on the top of my head.
Next, we have the rolling climax, which is kind of getting back to what you said, where you said you felt a book had more than one climax. And here's is a good way of phrasing it. A hero might go through a climax of mental change or decision, which triggers a physical climax or showdown in the material world. This could be followed by an emotional or spiritual climax as the hero's behavior and feelings change. So he's basically saying you could have 3 absolute high points in the movie hitting each of those things.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. And then he follows up with a well-made story can bring all levels, mind, body, and spirit to climax at the same moment. So you got your choices. If you have to parse them out, you can parse them out. If you think you can put it all together, way to go.
Right.
And the other reason why you'd have to have a rolling climax is you've got more than one main character. And the chances of everybody coming together at the same point for their climax and all being emotionally satisfying would be very difficult.
Trying to think of an example.
So there are a lot of stories that have more than one point of view, like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
There are some multiple people. They're climaxes for individuals. They're not all going to hit at the same moment, especially since none of the kids seem to get together. So in something like Game of Thrones, you have multiple character arcs, and every one of those characters gets their climax or something happening. We are booking along because these are lots of subheadings.
He's got something about catharsis.
Okay, this is really important. I think this actually goes to the heart of what a climax is. The climax you are trying to trigger in your hero and audience is the moment when they are the most conscious, when they have reached the highest point on a ladder of awareness. Okay, knock off the ladder of awareness, but I see the catharsis, the climax being that moment you are fully invested in the story. It's not simply lots of explosions and soaring music and, this is what we've been waiting for, but also you are engaged in the story and it's like, yes, or no. And then he says that you want laughter or tears. Sentimental stories can bring an audience to a catharsis of tears by pushing their emotions to a climax. I was thinking Steel Magnolias.
Yeah.
Which I loved, which my husband hated.
Ooh.
And early on, it was one of those things where I wanted to play him this movie that was really moving to me. And he's like, what? And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, he was right. It was fairly manipulative. That's kind of what it is too, right?
Yeah. I think girls like that movie more than dudes, right? Obviously. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's an older film. It's a good film, though. I actually hooked onto the laughter part, and he mentions short cartoons. And I thought, oh, yeah, like Saturday morning cartoons. At the end, everyone's like cracking jokes and laughing and resetting the world for next week. You know, don't worry, everything turned out okay.
Well, Phineas and Ferb did kind of a brilliant one of that because they'd always have two storylines and the two would meet at the end and they'd all come together and everything would reset. And then Candace would say, look, Mom, the kids are... Oh, never mind.
In the next page, he has character arc.
This was a good section.
It was, and I wished he would have brought this in sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Like this could have been in chapter 1.
This is his page of charts, and it has way more text than a lot of other stuff. What he does is he lines up the character arc with the hero's journey, point by point, and I thought it actually made sense.
Yeah. Should we go through each one or just a few?
You can go through ones you want.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Ordinary World. So the hero's journey is Ordinary World. For a character, it's their limited awareness of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's limited, so they have to figure things out. And then the call to adventure is their increased awareness. And you go a little further on to test allies and enemies, experimenting with first change. And I'm like, oh, that makes that step make more sense, especially in terms of character. But then the next step, the approach to the cave, is preparing for big change. And then the ordeal is attempting big change. Mm-hmm. I really wish this was in earlier because I was having a really hard time differentiating some of those. And now they make a lot more sense.
Well, a book or story should include a character. It should include a character arc. It maybe not identically in these places. It should be close to. So yes, it would have been useful to know that meeting the mentor and overcoming reluctance are kind of like both the same point. Meeting the mentor is the physical aspect, and then hero deciding to go along with the mentor or follow their things. That's a sort of acceptance to change.
Yeah. Then there's Last Chance.
And Last Chance doesn't have much in it, but it does have the graph of everything.
Yeah, it has Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much just lines up the character arc. And then at the bottom, there's a chart and a 3-act structure chart.
Yeah.
Does the same thing. So I guess I do tend to think in terms of more character-driven stories than I do plot-driven stories. And this kind of maps out how a character would face things. And this is why it makes much more sense to me now.
Mm-hmm.
And I wished it came earlier. All right. Watch your step. It's the final misstep of the hero.
Basically, it means, if you can figure out some way that your characters are also in danger of dying because, they're going to fall off a cliff or something, do it. Like, have some physical danger that they could misstep into while they're having their emotions and other stuff like that. Don't just have them fight on a regular street if you can have them fight at the top of a building.
Sure. The false claim, someone who steps forward to question the hero's credentials and then they get proven wrong in a very entertaining way. You plant a inconsequential character to question the hero's ability in the very end, like, oh, are you really a hero? And then they prove it very easily.
Yeah, he says this happens a lot in fairy tales. I was thinking, in Cinderella where she's going to put on the shoe and it gets broken and she pulls it out and says, well, I have the other one. The other one that I thought for fairy tales was the end of The Little Mermaid in the classic story where another princess shows up looking like her and then, she kills herself.
She turns into sea foam.
Well, that too.
Because she can't go to heaven.
Right. So then we get a good death and resurrection right there.
Kind of. I don't remember the other princess, though.
Well, in the movie, it was Ursula pretending to be the princess.
Well, I'm thinking of Hans Christian Andersen's.
In Hans, there's a girl that shows up that had met the prince earlier, and she just happens to look like the Little Mermaid, and then he gets married to her.
I forgot that detail, but I do remember the Little Mermaid having to go back into the sea, and she can't go to heaven, so she turns into sea foam.
Next section is proof, and I got absolutely nothing out of this.
It's essentially like the false claimant not being believed. Like you go on an adventure, you come back, and it's same thing.
I would like to point out that a revision they could have had, he's got a line saying, kids like to bring back souvenirs from summer vacations, partly to remind them of the trips, but also to prove to the other kids that they really visited those exotic locales. And I wrote, that's what Instagram is for.
I wonder if there's been a drop of sales for souvenirs now that we've got Instagram, and people take pictures and post them online instead of buying stuff.
Maybe.
Let's see. Sacrifice.
Okay, so again, we're getting to some useful stuff here. We're talking about resurrection, so let's think about how some people can actually die.
He talks about baptism, Star Wars. Luke stops relying on technology and he uses the Force. Later, he loses his hand but comes back in the third story, really hot in his black outfit. Yeah.
My mind was going to a better example. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Oh, yeah.
In Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, Aslan, the lion, is sacrificed. And
Like literally.
yeah, we've got all the Christian mythology, but yes, he is literally sacrificed. Comes back.
On an altar.
Yeah, total Christ story. I mean, that's what this is.
Well, this part, yes. The
Yes.
sacrifice part, yes.
Yes. The other thing about that is having a character die makes the choice real. That's not like having a character killed to really drive it home. So,
Yeah. Then there's incorporation. He says that an ideal climax would test everything he's learned and allow him to show that he absorbed the mentor, shapeshifter, shadow, guardian, and allies along the way. I will throw a bone here to him because it sounds like he's already talked about this, but not necessarily, because I can't pinpoint one, but I do know of stories where you kind of collect knowledge and various things from your travels, and they all kind of meld together for the hero, and they use that knowledge in the end. And they do learn it from their mentors and shapeshifters, like, oh, I know the world now, and they can maneuver through the world.
again, we discussed this in the previous episode with The Road Back, because it also talks about how all those things that were picked up and all those things that were learned were applied. So this is based off of Joseph Campbell's works on mythology. And on some level, he was identifying things that show up again and again. And in maybe myths, it's a bit more distinct.
Maybe.
But here it feels like this could go with the other chapter too.
Right.
Anyway.
Then he's got change. We've already talked about that one over and over again. He does have a really good analysis of Romancing the Stone, and that is a good movie, although quite dated. But I'm not going to talk about it or read it.
One thing I did get out of this was the trick for writers is to make the change visible and in appearance or action.
If it's a movie,
But even if it's a book, in a book it won't matter so much the characters change, but there should be something, it may be an action or something that shows that it's real. It can't just be in their head.
why not?
Because if it's just in their head, do we know it's really real?
Because you can read characters' thoughts in a book. That's what makes books kind of special.
If I were reading a book, let's say A Christmas Carol, because that's definitely got to change at the end. Like, it's important that he throws out the window and he goes and buys the...
Because it's a movie.
It was a book first.
But not all books have to do that. If it's a thinker,
If it's a thinker, but if it's a thinker, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that says, well, you know, it didn't fly for me because I didn't actually believe they changed.
I don't know. I'm still holding out on that one.
When I'm writing, I'm very much looking for ways to externalize the internals. Because if I'm just sitting in the character's head the whole time, especially this is the climax, it shouldn't just be something in the character's head.
For genre fiction, yeah, that makes sense because there's a lot of action. But what about a book like The Poisonwood Bible? I don't remember that well. It's been a long time since I read it.
I mean, there's the whole running away from the village and all the destruction and
Ordeal.
you know.
That was not. They have to prove their change, right?
Yeah, you're right, because it continues on with all their individual lives, but it does show the stuff that they do physically.
With their lives, but that's not like explosion, or that's not like they're physically moving. It's like a thing they achieved.
Well, I mean, like you've got the character that was disabled, and she reteaches herself to walk in a normal way. That's something, you know, it's showing that she's healing on the inside, but it's also a physical change on the outside.
Sure. I'm just saying that there might be a thinker book and that it may not be something physical.
It might not be explosions, it might not be a fight, but there should be some real world manifestation.
Something outside the character, sure, but nothing physical. Like that doesn't have to be a physical change.
Like a change of costume. I get that.
No,
yeah.
not a change of costume.
But like
a,
in their change of, but he also says change of actions. Like they behave differently around
that's
people.
fine. That works.
Okay, that's
But it's not physical change necessarily. That's just how they are now. They've changed their identity, how they move through the world. You can put that on a scene, sure. I'm trying to think of a story, and my brain can't think of one because I'm on the spot. I need a book I've read. And
apparently we're not doing that anymore. So
okay.
but we do have a book to talk about climax, and we decided to not use John Scalzi's Kaiju Preservation Society because, first of all, I thought we already covered what we thought was the climax in the previous one, and there's definitely no death and resurrection there. So we're going to go back to The Last Unicorn because that had one wonderful climax. And that climax was her giving up her human form, becoming a unicorn again. So there's your death and resurrection right there. And there's sacrifice. She's giving up, her chance with Prince Lear. And, and then there's a confrontation.
Yeah. If you would like a step-by-step or hero's journey step-by-step breakdown of The Last Unicorn, it's on our website under the episode What Makes a Hero, episode 4, season 3. In my notes, I say that the unicorn is resurrected. She's returned back to her immortal self and drives the bull into the sea, freeing all the unicorns. Mm-hmm. It was very dramatic.
It was very emotional, too.
Yes.
And I'm not just saying that because, I was 10 years old when I saw it the first time.
Right.
And with that, we're done with the resurrection, and we're around to Return with the Elixir. I was so exhausted by the time I got to this one.
Stage 12, we've made it. We made it, dear listener. We're almost at the end. If we were heroes on a journey, we have to survive one last bit.
So he says, heroes return to their starting place, go home, or continue the journey, but they always proceed with a sense that they are commencing on a new life, one that will be forever different because of the road just traveled.
There you go.
Often in movies, it's a montage. If you get to see where all the characters are, you get to see kind of all the things changing, and you get to see them in a better place.
Yeah. I like the ones where they jump like 5 years ahead, and then you get to see what happened to them. So he mentions the denouement, which is another name for return. It's the word meaning untying or unknotting. So essentially it just ties up all the loose ends, really. And that's why it's important in the return to deal with subplots and all the issues, questions you've raised in the story, or your reader feels cheated.
I like this line. The plot lines are knotted together to create conflict and tension, and usually it's desirable to release the tension and resolve the conflict by untying these knots. We also speak of tying up the loose ends of a story in a denouement. So this is when your metaphors contradict each other.
His or mine?
No, his.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Unraveling or tying up.
Whatever you want to think about it. Mm-hmm. So all the old questions should be addressed or at least restated. Yes, make sure that you don't leave any loose ends because I will notice them and they will annoy the stuff out of me if I see your movie and you left some open.
The next section actually is useful. He talks about two-story endings, two forms, circular form and open-ended approach.
Yeah, it's pretty much the difference between the ending of Iron Man and the ending of Captain America.
Okay.
That was my theory. So the two-story forms, the circular is the most popular one. It is the closed form. Having your hero return to her starting point or remember how she started allows you to draw a comparison for the audience.
Mm-hmm. A good example of that one is Back to the Future. Because at the beginning, or actually all the way along, he's impulsive and it gets him into trouble. And the very end of it, he doesn't do the impulsive thing.
Right.
And that's what he's learned. So it wraps it up by going to some of the earlier stuff and showing it play out.
Oh my gosh, he did get resurrected because he almost disappeared.
Right.
Because his parents almost didn't get together. Hey, it does show up, especially in those 80s movies.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But then there's the other one. So we did the circular story form, and then there's the open-ended story form.
Right.
And I thought that was Captain America because he dies in the end.
Another way of classifying the open ending one is any point where after the film you argue with somebody else for half an hour about what had actually happened and what was happening next.
Ooh, that's a good definition. Yeah. Then we have
the achievements of perfection.
Okay.
Which is the happily ever after or a wedding.
Yeah.
Like in Pride and Prejudice. Aww. A double wedding.
Darcy. Oh. Anyway, if you haven't seen the BBC or the miniseries, get thee to the television with you.
Okay, so
the open-ended story form, I would argue, is the most satisfying for me because I like literary novels and they're usually going to go there. And it says, by contrast, the open-ended approach views the world as an ambiguous, imperfect place because it is. And I don't like it when it just gets tied up too perfectly because that's not how the world works.
And because you never know if your book might take off and they'll want a sequel.
Oh, yeah.
And then you'll be prepared to do it. You know, it's always horrible when you read a fantastic, perfect book and it was so good that they got a sequel and they didn't know how to get into the sequel because everything was tied up so well.
Yeah. Is your book an open-ended or a closed-ended book?
Well, definitely open-ended because it's a series. In fact, I even say that, you know, there's always an encore.
Oh, there you go. That's true. Boy bands, right? Always an encore.
Always an encore.
So then we have functions of the return, a last chance to touch the emotions of the audience. Then there's surprise. Should be done with a little taste of the unexpected, a sudden revelation. Wait, I am a prince. I can marry a princess. Lone Star. Okay, I'm mixing the streams here, but if you've seen Spaceballs, he gets to marry the princess because he learns that he's a prince.
I mean, what it is there's a little zinger at the very end, a little surprise. It's almost like the Marvel, you know, wait till the end of the credits.
Yeah. Let's see. Reward and punishment. Punishment should fit the crime and have the quality of poetic justice. The reward should be proportionate to the sacrifice they have offered.
So at this point in the book, you either show the hero getting something really good, or you can also show the bad guy getting something bad. And often there's that final one of like the bad guy in the jail and can't do anything.
What about Kaiser Soze?
What about what?
Kaiser Soze from The Usual Suspects.
I did not see that movie.
What? What? Okay, again, get thee to the television and go watch that movie. Oh my gosh. Anyway, for those of you who know what I just said, it's ambiguous. Is it poetic justice? We're not sure. I see. I like those ambiguous endings.
We're now finally at the Elixir, which, you know, wouldn't this be at the beginning? Anyway.
So we knew what an elixir meant?
Yeah.
I'm talking too much this episode. It's your turn.
Nah.
You're just fine.
Well, I didn't read this part as carefully, so I was just trying to get to the end of it. Okay, so this, in my notes, I basically said that we're getting to the types of elixirs. So the types of rewards or things that happen afterwards. So it's stuff you put at the end of the book. And the elixir is your world-saving thing you bring back. In a kind of a fetch sort of hero's quest, you finally get the thing and you bring it back and everyone's happy.
Right. They mentioned King Arthur and the Grail. There's the elixir of love.
Yeah.
We all know what that does. The world is changed. The wisdom which heroes bring back with them may be so powerful that it forces change not only in them, but also those around them. Reminded me of those plots where like they would reveal like this big, huge truth. And it's like, it was the CEO that did it. And everyone goes, oh, and something bad happens to them.
I would say for the world's change is something like, say, WALL-E, where you see the plants and the earth coming back. And then you see that little whole section of like, you know, how they make it a better world this time.
No, that was actually an unhappy ending. That was a sad ending. The moment the earth tries to heal itself, the humans come back and start.
No, they were better. They learned. The world changed.
That poor world, it doesn't get a break. That was how I interpreted it. It's true. I know what they wanted me to think, but I thought, no. I'm like, oh no, the moment it comes back, we have to go back there and mess it up.
So then we've got new responsibility, a new role. You know, the hero now is advanced to like, you know, the commander stage. They got a new title. They get the badge or something like that.
Thor and the Valkyrie have to run that little town and protect their people.
Right, because Thor asked to assume the mantleship of leader.
And he didn't want to. He wanted to be like kind of a rogue and have fun and do stuff.
In that case, he wasn't something he wanted to do. I think this is more the case of someone that maybe wanted to get into the police academy, and we see him, graduating and joining the force.
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of like an earned thing as opposed to...
No, I mean, Thor earned it. I mean, he grew up, essentially. He was very immature, and then by the end, he realized that almost everybody dies, almost all of his people, and what's left he has to take care of.
Of course, it's kind of ruined when we see him afterwards. We see he's got a beer belly and not doing anything.
That's the next episode. We don't know that.
Okay.
And that was the glorious storytelling. It was awesome. Sorry. I loved it.
We get sadder but wiser, which is, something bad happens, but the hero has learned something, and that counts.
Mm-hmm. I thought this was interesting. He may fall back to his original irrepressible attitude, closing the circle and dooming himself to repeat the adventure. For this is the penalty of failing to return with the elixir. The hero or someone else is doomed to repeat the ordeals until the lesson is learned or the elixir is brought home to share. And he ends up playing video games, getting a beer belly, and right? He that's essentially what happened to him. He's doomed to repeat it, and he does. I thought of one more thing. Lord of the Rings. They didn't throw the ring into Mount Doom. So somebody else has to go on this quest to get that ring back into Mount Doom. Anyway, then epilogue.
The epilogue is, he says it's actually an epilogue or postscript on a rare occasion can serve to complete the story. And I don't think epilogues are very rare at all. I think they're used all the time in movies. Like, not necessarily 5 years later, but we definitely like to touch base on what everybody is doing and how things have improved for them.
Yeah. There's pitfalls of the return, unsatisfied by the ambiguous ending.
So here's the problem. At this point, it would make sense for him to list a bunch of endings that don't work because they don't follow his advice. This is a classic rule with these kind of books, which is saying, look, I'm really smart. These people are stupid. This is why it didn't work. However, he doesn't actually want to diss anybody's movies because that could get him in trouble. And so he goes through this in such a way that he talks about possible things that could go wrong, but he doesn't actually tell you a movie that it happens in.
Well, he does mention the show Sopranos.
Yes, he said that people might feel unhappy with the ambiguous ending. He also mentions Basic Instincts, but he just lauded Basic Instinct earlier for its ending, so it's okay to say that maybe people didn't like it.
So he's just trying to be careful so he can get hired.
Totally.
Nice.
This does no bite to it, so it's not nearly as useful as it could be. Also, he phrases it, the problem is the return is too abrupt, prolonged, unfocused, unsurprising, unsatisfying. Yeah, but we can't give you any examples of all these things.
Right. Okay. He talks about unresolved subplots. This would have very much served the writer better had it appeared earlier in the book. And he says subplots should have at least 3 beats or scenes distributed throughout the story, one in each act. I'm like, whoa.
That makes sense.
It does. But why is it here? On page 259.
At the end of the journey.
And there's no more about it. Like, that's it. It's like, there's no
blink and you miss it.
Why or how or examples. Nope.
Okay, the next one is too many endings. So just as we talked about how it's important to wrap up all the subplots, it's also important not to wrap up all the subplots because you have too many endings.
It happens. Sometimes the movie goes on too long.
Yeah, I mean, there's it never ends. It's like always something else, always something else.
Yeah, just end the darn movie.
You end up with this issue at the end of the book, but you end up in the issue because you made things so complicated that you can't wrap it up. It's no good having the keep it simple, stupid principle at the very end of something. So you need to start off that way. You can't simplify things after it's really complex.
Right. I find that interesting because in The Last Unicorn, the book ending and the movie ending are rather different.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie ending cuts it short.
Right.
And the book ending went on a bit more, but I didn't think it overdid it. But I could see that feeling like they'd overdid it in a movie if they did the whole thing.
Right.
So right. I wonder if books get more of a leeway. Like you can go on a bit longer.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Because people don't read it in one setting, usually.
Right.
So other issues, abrupt endings, happens too fast, loses focus.
Punctuation.
Okay, this one here was like, oh man. I mean, this would work really well at the beginning of this chapter.
It's not a bad metaphor.
No, it's actually a really good metaphor, and you could address each of these things throughout.
Read the sentence.
Okay, well, you read the sentence.
A story like a sentence, can end in only 4 ways, with a period, an exclamation point, a question mark, or an ellipses. The 3 little dots that indicate your thoughts have just trailed off vaguely. So that makes sense. If it's a period, it just ends. Like there is an ending, and that is the end of the story. If it's an exclamation point, it's like, oh my God, whoa, they got married, or explosions, or whatever. The everything has changed. There could be a question mark, like, huh? Like, really, that's it? Or, uh-oh, is there more? Did the villain really die? Mm-hmm. And then there's the ellipses, ...
To be continued.
Yes, kind of like the end of Matrix. He goes flying off into the air. Anything else?
Oh, I promised that worst sentence in the book.
Oh, yes.
And
yes, I
realized
must have it.
I went past it because it was one of the areas we're going past. And this is in the section of change back in the resurrection. And he writes, perfection through a man was within her grasp, but it was snatched away at the last minute.
As it is for all women, right?
I think most times it's when they get the man that they realize that they don't have it perfect.
Right. How would you know? It's always the 3 months later. And then you're like, oh my God, I let him move in. I get rid of this one. Just kidding.
Okay, so.
Dear listener, that's it. We made it.
I wanted to look at one last time with Kaiju Preservation Society because I think Scalzi does do the Elixir bit very well. There's a couple different ones he does. He does the letter written to the new person, which is kind of an emotional sort of like, here's where we are, here's what's happening, here's...
Right, which calls back from the letter he received when he showed up.
Mm-hmm. And then we get like what happens to him. He decides he's going to keep his job as opposed to getting a promotion, so kind of the opposite of that, but he's happy with his job. And then what they do is, actually one of the examples here, they do a repeat of the very beginning because he gets a food delivery from the woman in the company that was around to see him get fired.
The one who made the bet to fire him.
And he reciprocates what Tom Stevens did for him by giving her a card to get a job. And so even though he doesn't take on the elevated role or the official position, you can see that he is acting in the way that Tom Stevens did at the beginning of the book for him.
Right. And we know that the character, although was very angry that he got fired and it caused that whole thing, he is willing to forgive. Mm-hmm. So he has changed, I guess. He seemed already pretty forgiving.
I think he would have forgiven her from the beginning, too, because, I mean, what can you do?
I don't know. But then that's the problem with the book, is he doesn't change. Jamie is the same from the beginning to the end.
There's no emotional arc.
Nope. Anyway, that is it.
That is it.
We are done with all the steps. Whew, that took a while.
And looking at the book, there's still half left. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually take a break. Renee has a friend who knows a lot about AI, and we're going to pick his brains about these new chatbots and how people can use AI as tools and whether writers should use AI as tools. That's an area that we covered a long time back when ChatGPT first came out, and I think it's worth revisiting at this point.
Yeah, so if you want to prepare for that episode and that interview, you can go onto our website and find the episode ChatGPT, Write Me My Novel.
Yeah, although it's completely outdated now.
But I will say, well, it does set a primer for what we're probably going to do with AI again, which is plug in some prompts and see how well it's gotten since then. But that is actually one of our most popular episodes, oddly enough. I don't suggest you have AI write your novel. Please don't do that.
And don't say that we told you to do that either, because we definitely are not supporting that.
No.
But then as far as this book goes, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think the rule is that we'll take a look at it. And if anything we want to skip or stop the book, we will do it, because I feel like we've actually covered what we promised to do when we picked up this book.
Anyway, it was fun talking to y'all. Don't forget to go to the website and check out the Hero's Journey Primer if you want to see all the steps in their glory according to The Hobbit, Tolkien's The Hobbit. We have a process group every Wednesday. please buy Kim's book. Can you remind our dear listeners of the title of your book?
My title of the book is Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters. It's the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You can find it on Amazon.
Yep, it is a lot of fun.
And then what else? We would love, if you are enjoying this podcast, for you to click that you liked it or review it.
Or leave us a tip.
Or on our website, we have a tip jar. And finally, if you have someone that is a writer that you think might find this podcast useful, to point them this way.
Yeah. All right. Well, we survived.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
That's a lot of movies. That's a lot of discussion in like one. That's like a discussion soup.